Chernin, right?
Chernin, like churning
Chernin.
butter.
Like Chernin beer. I love that. Yes, Wes Chernin. I am so excited to have him on. Wes, the reason why I brought you on is because, first of all, I've been following your Instagram for about a year, and I love your advocacy efforts, especially when it comes to trans youth. There seems that there's been a large attack on trans youth. I mean, frankly, there's always been, but now more than ever, it seems like the veil has been lifted and things are being exposed. So I'm very excited to have you on because a lot of us who are not a part of the community are kind of in the dark in a lot of ways. It's not a community, so we just do not know. So I wanted to bring these issues to the forefront so that way, as speech language pathologists, we can at least do our part in making sure that we are allowing stories to be shared and really that we're creating safe spaces for youth.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much for inviting me on. I'm super happy to be here.
Yes, yes. Well, I'm going to go ahead and let you gave me a fabulous bio, but I think it's best if it's given by you. Can you please introduce yourself?
Absolutely, yeah. So, my name is Wes, and my pronouns are he, him. Um, as far as my professional life goes, I consider myself an educator and a speech therapist, and also a collaborator on queer and trans belonging. Um, I do LGBTQ related DEI work, a lot of it with other SLPs and also with other educators and healthcare providers and really businesses and organizations of all kinds, which is really, really fun. Um, I a little background, I guess, of me as an SLP is that I started my career, the first 5 years of my career, I was in EIECSE, and that was really fun. It was kind of my dream job. I loved the age group. But as time went on, it was no longer a good fit for me, and I was doing this DEI work on the side. It started to build more momentum, and I decided to leave EIECSE, and I switched over to do some private practice, also pediatrics, and I did that for a couple years, and now currently I'm doing my consulting work full time.
Well, first of all, congratulations on that full-time consulting. That's
Thank
got to be like a passion product of love.
It certainly is. Absolutely.
Now you said EIESCE, and I knew it, but it took me a while. Could you explain to the audience what that stands for?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Sometimes I forget that I was deep in that world for so long that I need to explain myself. So it stands for Early Intervention, Early Childhood Special Education. So I was working mainly with 3 to 5 year olds, sometimes a little bit younger, and I was doing community based and family centered therapy. So I was going into preschools and into homes and providing services.
Excellent. Can you tell us a little bit about your why you started the field in the first place?
Oh, for sure. I got into speech therapy because, well, as a kid, I always was like drawn to like working in education, but I never saw myself as a classroom teacher. And after I graduated undergrad, where I just studied liberal arts and psychology, I didn't really know what I wanted to do, but I knew I wanted to work with kids. So I got a job as essentially a paraeducator, paraprofessional, and I was working in a preschool for autistic kids. And while I was doing that, I was exposed to SLPs, and I realized that my favorite part of the work was when I was able to like be be a participant in helping these little kids like feel seen and feel understood. Like I could see this light bulb go off when like this movement from feeling really frustrated because the people around them weren't understanding them to then um like something really changed when they were understood and their message got across effectively, and I just fell in love with that piece of it, and so that's what really led me into the field.
Well, thank God you made it. Thank God you made it to the field. Really.
Thank you, that's flattering.
So that does bring me to my next question. What life experiences brought you to where you are now in your career?
Oh, um I almost wanna say, like, what life experiences did not bring me to where I am now, you know? Like, um, for one, like, I don't know if I explicitly mentioned that I am transgender and I am queer, and that is, um, absolutely what has led me into, like, the consulting side of where I am now, and I think that, um I think there's, like, some element of this, like, intersection between me having that finding that passion, right, as to why I wanted to become an SLP, where I was like, it's so beautiful and empowering to be a part of someone's team that helps people feel seen and understood and heard. And then as I was, like, diving into my SLP work and, somewhat sharing my identity as a queer and trans person, people started um it started to become really clear to me that people really um just still have a lot to learn about queer and trans people. And so folks were asking me to provide little trainings and little sessions to help build cultural responsiveness within the field of speech language pathology. And I just like I just kind of tapped into my own um my own lived experience of like needing to knowing how it feels to like not be seen, and then being able to do something to help people not just see me better but to see other folks in my community better. And um I've lost track a little bit of like where where I'm exactly going with answering your question, but I hope that lands. I hope that resonates in some way.
It does, because what's going through my mind, you mentioned the word intersections, and so I'd like to know a bit about how I'm trying to figure out how to even phrase this question to where it makes sense. But I think about culture and we have intersections. And so, how
Mhm.
would you say that your cultural intersections collide and how that's impacted you? And just in general, and even in society?
I mean, I think I'm still trying to figure it out, honestly.
Mm,
Like, um, you know, I have this intersection of being an SLP and being transgender and also being queer and all the history that comes with that. I also am hard of hearing. I started wearing hearing aids about 6-ish years ago. That is like becoming oh no, something's ringing in this office that I don't have control over. I'm so
that's right, no worries.
that is like that is my me being hard of hearing is becoming more and more part of my identity because it's impacting my life more and more and more. And so I'm like tapping into, I just feel like all of my intersections, especially the ones in which kind of have been marginalized and discriminated against, like, I feel like all of that helps me broaden my empathy and understanding of other identities which I do not have personal experience with, but which I understand and can see like the systems working against us in similar and different ways.
Mhm,
And I think that also like helps fuel my passion both as a DEI consultant and as an SLP, in that I see how um like um disability justice like can't just be its own thing. Like, it's disability justice is trans justice, is racial justice. Like all of these things um are not isolated, and our clients do not only have one of these identities necessarily. So that's where my mind goes at this moment. I feel like I really am still I still have a lot to learn and a lot to sit with in terms of how do all of my intersections, like, how do they all actually intersect in everything that I'm doing and how I'm showing up and um, experiencing the world?
Well, I do appreciate your answer when you said that pretty much we can all really just group them into one because at the end of the day, we're impacted. So, just like from my personal experience, I could show up as a Black woman, and regardless, I'm impacted because I'm Black and I'm a woman, I'm impacted. And so,
Mhm.
for yourself as a queer trans person who is also deaf and hard of hearing, there are barriers working against you as well. So, I've always thought about it. I've compartmentalized it in my mind a lot, just like there's one, there's two, and then they collide. But to think of it as one big group thing, I think that's very powerful.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with you there a lot.
Okay, you might have to excuse me. The doorbell just rang, so I'm looking at my dog's very alert. So just bear with
It's
us.
all good. We got uncontrollable noise factors happening.
We're post-COVID era, y'all. Bear with us. Okay, so tell us about. There's two things that are really on my mind right now. First, I'll start light. What can you tell us a little bit about your brand, Hey Wes?
Sure. Yeah. Hey Wes is it's my company. It's just me.
Mhm.
And it's essentially the entity through which I provide trainings and workshops and consulting services to SLPs, school districts, schools, clinics, all the places, all the things. So that's my it's my passion project. It's what I feel like um, people are. Oh goodness gracious! I'm so sorry. I don't know how to turn
Me
anything on
too.
this.
It's okay.
um, so hey Wes, it's like the work that I'm doing as this DEI consultant, it like came to me really organically. Like as I mentioned before, people started coming to once they like knew that I was in this field and I am trans, they started asking me like, "Can you help us understand?" And at first, I didn't see myself having that role, but I said yes to these opportunities, and I quickly realized that I love doing this work. Like it's so much fun for me. And like it's really empowering. It's so cool the types of responses I get to be able to contribute to people's learning in this way and to be able to feel like I'm like standing up for myself and for my community. It's it it's really, really cool. So essentially, like I started this work in that way, and a lot of that initially was unpaid labor, and it started to really, even though I was loving it, I was like, whoa, like this is like emotionally taxing. I'm putting in a ton of hours to prepare for these things. Like I need to be charging people for my labor. And so I initially a really good friend of mine, one of my best friends up in Seattle, Finn Menzies, he and I created this organization called Q Inclusion. And he's also a trans educator. And we were providing services together. And over time, like that evolved and we needed to focus on separate things. And I was able to dive into this work full time and he wasn't able to. He needed to put it on the back burner. So I created Hey Wes. I really wanted this approachable name and this type of work where this type of like brand where I want folks to know that like it's me, like, you're talking to me. I don't have a team of people, like, it's just, let's let's talk about this stuff, like, I'm here and I'm ready.
Sorry, I had to put you on mute because they were going crazy over here. Yes, no, the Hey West makes it very approachable. I definitely had my assumptions that Hey was probably a lot of the DMs you were getting, Hey Wes. And so I'm like, okay, that's so clever. So
Oh,
that's
for
good to know
sure.
origin story is a little bit different, but along the same lines.
Yeah, there's definitely that element too. Like it's a fun, like, yeah, people say, "Hey Wes," all the time, and it's like, oh, their introduction to me, they're wanting to dive into this content and ask me something. So it's there too.
So I want to ask you, what transformative experience, any story that just pops out, your favorite client success story? Can you tell us about that?
Mm. Well, okay, so the one that comes to mind first is after like so I'll often get people reaching out to me after they've participated in one of my workshops, kind of following up with me, letting me know something they've tried out or how things have gone. And um, this story actually is like it's it's actually not one specific person. I have heard this same story from multiple people, and it's this. Throughout my workshop, um, the message really lands with them that it's important for them to um, share their pronouns with their students, and that it can open up a door for their students to share pronouns with them if they want to. So multiple people have come up to me afterwards, or have like messaged me and have said, the next day after I went to your workshop, I decided I would share my pronouns with my students, and some of them decided to share their pronouns with me back. And guess what? I've been using the wrong pronouns for some of my students this whole year because they didn't know that I was a safe person for them to share their true identity with. They didn't know that they could really be themselves around me. And what kind of impact was that having on the way that they were showing up in speech therapy or in their classroom or at recess, like everywhere in their academic life, in their social life, in their communication. So that's just so powerful to me every time it happens, and to know that it's happening all over the place is, um, it's really cool. It feels really powerful and beautiful.
I definitely feel the transformative, like powerful shift happening each time kids are empowered to advocate for themselves and at least express their identities. Can you tell us how you teach kids how to advocate for themselves, especially if they are trans or non-gender, non-conforming?
Yeah. I mean, so I haven't personally, coached trans youth. I mostly coach the adults in their lives,
Mm, we need it.
but yeah, but I would say, like, in terms of self-advocacy, I mean, f for giving advice to a trans or non-binary young person, I mean, I think, like, there's l there's lo I keep in my head, I'm like, "Oh, the number one thing," and I'm like, a bunch of things are coming up. Like, safety is something that's coming up for me. Like,
Yeah.
always take care of yourself. Like, assess your situation to determine how safe you are and how open you can be. Like, you get to decide. You don't have to disclose your identity if you don't want to or you don't feel safe to. And at the same time, like, you belong. You are a really valuable part of our society. Like, we want you here. There are some, depending on the age and um kind of lived experience that each person has, like, I guess I would, um, have a conversation with them to varying degrees of, like, different types of pushback and how much pushback there might be, but ultimately sharing this message of, like, um, their rightness and their beauty, and sharing, like, my trans joy with them, and sharing other, like, trans adults joy. I actually just was reading something. I can't remember where I saw this, But it was something about these two um, these two trans teens went into an LGBTQ bookstore, and um, they started talking to the people working there, and the teens went into this bookstore. They didn't realize that it was like a queer and trans run bookstore. They just thought they saw some like LGBTQ things. They thought it was because of Pride Month. So they go in and they start talking to one of the people working there, and that person lets them know that they are trans. And these teens are like, just one of them was just like getting so excited and was like, "Oh my gosh, like how old are you?" Like you're I think the person maybe was like in their 30s or something. And this young trans kid was like, "You're the oldest trans person that I've ever seen, like, that I've ever known." And then, like, that person was able to share, like, pull out different books of authors and, like, this person's trans and they're 50, and this other person who works here sometimes is trans and in their 40s or 60s, and just sharing, like, that we that we belong out in society, that we thrive, that we like have successful and thriving and beautiful and joyful lives. And that was just this huge thing for those kids, coming from um, families and communities that were not so supportive.
Well, speaking of families and communities not so supportive, and I even hate to take this spin right now because it's so lighthearted, but it is sadly the reality, right? Yes, I feel it. So there's a lot going on around the country with the trans bans, trans children not being able to access healthcare, book banning, especially, is something that I wanted to touch on. From your perspective, can you kind of give us a quick lowdown of what's going on? People who intentionally deplug from the news probably have no idea this is even happening. So just a quick lowdown of what's going on and really how we can help and create those safe spaces right now.
Yeah. Yeah. So um, there have been, in 2023, there have been over 500 anti-trans bills brought into legislation across the country, I think like in 49 states. Um, and most of them are targeting trans youth, oftentimes trans girls, but they also target trans adults, and they target us in lots of different ways. Um, it's really scary, and it's really bad, and it's really real. And I think that everyone that I know in my community, um, it's heavy on their heart. And it's yeah, it's just we've seen just this massive, massive uptick in that. And it's hard, it's hard to give just like a super it's hard to give just like a checklist of like, here's what you can do, here's what you should do, and then it's gonna be better, because it like I don't know. I don't know, but there definitely are things in terms of, like, if you're wanting to be an ally, like, um, actually, like, showing up in solidarity with us, and that's gonna look different and mean something different to each person, and that's okay, but, like, doing something and, like, showing up, saying things to the people you hear who maybe are in favor of those anti-trans bills, who maybe have a lot of there's so much misinformation and inaccurate information out there about trans people and non-binary people. And it's really detrimental. So if you are cisgender, meaning not trans, you identify with the gender you were assigned at birth. If you are cisgender, and especially if you are also heterosexual, um, and also white, like if you have all of these privileges, your risk to say something and to try to just voice your allyship is so much more minimal. Your risk is minimal, like than someone who is trans or who is gay or who is black or brown or a person of color, because there's there's so much more for me, there's so much more vulnerability in if I don't know who else is taking up the space and who's in the room for me to say something, um, I'm gonna feel like my safety might be at risk. And so I ask those people who don't feel like their safety would be at risk to say something, to please say something. Um, and the other thing is to like advocate for training, like people for education on this. Like that, I think that the more people hear trans stories, the more, the more, um, I don't even know the right word, but the situation is just going to get better if people can actually sit and listen to us. And I know not everybody is going to be able to do that, but all I know is that like when I came out, this was in I came out as trans in 2011, I think, and like there were so many trans people that came before me, but in terms of like the how much it came up in like just conversation and in the media, or how much people heard about it, it was really tiny. People didn't really have much information about trans people at that time. And um, no one in my family knew what, what I was really talking about. Of course, most of us had probably like heard that it exists, but like, what does that, there's just a really like a not understanding. And because they took the time to just listen to my experience and get to really try to understand what I was going through, not only did my parents like get on board right away, but also my grandparents and my extended relatives, who some of which, our political views do not all align. Like there is real power in just getting being open to getting to know someone else's lived experience, and like recognizing that you can honor that and you can respect that and you can let that be and let that person thrive, and it doesn't take anything away from you. It doesn't I think that there's fear around that right now.
I am really agreeing with you, and I'm so happy that you said this because this episode is about promoting belonging and inclusivity. And one thing that's coming to mind is just like what you said, a lot of people, there's homophobia, transphobia, all of the phobias are ingrained in this country's fabric because we're just built on these religious beliefs. And
Mm,
sadly, they're ingrained in us, right? Because we're getting all of these messages, just like you said, that's misinformation. And so we're conditioned to believe something, to think something. And so now everyone's like, no, let's actually include everybody. Let's actually stop being so hateful and actually stop turning people away. And so what's coming to my mind is people who really do want to try. I even think about maybe there are some people in Florida or just in those red states who sadly it's their environment to be
mhm,
a little close-minded, but there's still that something in them that wants to try.
mhm,
So with all of that said, how can we be genuine in our efforts to be inclusive and to create an environment, a society of belonging for trans and queer people?
mhm. I think a big part of it is just by like listening to people's voices who are different from your own and like believing them and then respecting what they say. So like using people's names and pronouns even if they don't match up with your idea of what it should be. Um like incorporating singular they into your practices when you're working on pronouns with your students. Um Making sure you have representation of all types of human diversity. Um, these are things that those are like the everyday things that kids pick up on and can like really um, it can really shape them into just being more um, open and accepting and inclusive people as they get older.
Thank you so much, Wes. Well, while we're wrapping up, I'm really thinking about the school-based SLPs who are going to be going back and working with a diverse range of children. And so, can you give us just the top, maybe 3 tips off the top of your head of how we can start the year off right in creating an inclusive space for trans and queer children and youth?
Yeah, I think I might echo some of what I was just talking about. Three things I think would be number one, um, if you're in an environment where you can, when you're introducing yourself and sharing your name with your students, also share your pronouns. Um, Number two, get in the habit of using gender inclusive language practices. So instead of using what we typically um, what's just so ingrained in us, which is like gender specific language and which is based off of assumptions, like looking at someone and assuming what their gender is. And then we use language for that. So instead of saying, you know, boys and girls, we're doing this, or, oh, he has your ball over there when you don't know the student, using gender inclusive language instead. So saying, oh, that kid in the red shirt has the ball over there. Um, Saying learners or friends or some other word instead of boys and girls. And number three would be, I think, representation. Make sure that you have in your materials, in your books, in whatever it is that you use in your space, that you have um, representation, not just of people who look straight and look gay or look cis and look trans, but like people who just have different gender expressions. And like that doesn't necessarily mean one thing or the other. People who have different disabilities, people who have different skin colors, like all of the different types of representation is really, really important.
Do you have any book recommendations for us?
Ooh, yeah. Oh gosh. Okay. Um, so one of my favorites is just it's literally just called The Pronoun Book, and it just has all these different pictures of all different types of people, and then it shows you what their pronouns are, which is really cool. Just showing like there's so many different ways to look like a she, and so many different ways to look like a he, and so on. Um, Also, in terms of like the intersectionality, I love Bodies Are Cool.
I've seen that one.
That is probably like my number one favorite book. I love that book so much. It's so beautiful. The artwork is beautiful. The message is beautiful. And then I would recommend two different book lists for people to check out.
Hmm.
There's there's this bookshop called Out and About Bookshop, and they're a mobile bookshop, LGBTQ bookshop based in the San Francisco Bay Area, but they online on their they have all of these different book lists that like they're broken down into like stories, stories that have LGBTQ characters that aren't about LGBTQ identities, or stories that specifically talk about gender identity, or stories with two dads, or it just they like break it down and they talk about different age ranges. So I highly recommend checking out and About Bookshop. And then the other book list that I recommend is Teaching Outside the Binary, which I think is on their website, which I believe is teachingoutsidethebinary.com. And you can find their book lists there too.
Thank you so much for the plethora of resources. I will be sure to put those in the show notes for anybody who's watching the replay of this. So one question I really like to ask every single guest, and some people call this a hot question, so get ready. Are you ready?
I'm ready. Okay, I think.
What changes would you like to see done in the field of speech language pathology?
What changes? I want people to recognize that trans rights and non-binary people's rights are relevant to this profession.
Mhm.
I want them to realize that because we work with people, this is relevant. And in addition to that, neurodivergent folks and disabled folks are actually more likely to be LGBTQ than neurotypical and non-disabled people. And so it really, really applies to this field, being able to consider who people are that you're working with, or who their friends might be, or who their family members might be. It's relevant and it is important. I think, like, in addition to like the actionable things like we talked about, I feel like that mindset shift is really, really important, and the number one thing that I'm thinking of right now.
Thank you for saying that. If I can add to that,
Please.
one thing I'm thinking about is our ethical. I think we kind of forget it's our ethical responsibility to care for the well-being of the people who we serve, which is number one principle of ethics. And so when I think about what you said, some people might even challenge you on that. How does he know that neurodivergent people are most likely to be queer or trans? How does he even know that? And I'm like, well, you know what? Go do your research. Go do your research and keep reading and keep applying that to practice. Not to even shame anybody. I got a little hot there, but I got a little hot. But no, really, truly, Wes, I thank you so much for coming on today and for being so transparent and genuine with your stories. How can people find you if they want to learn more about you, learn more about your brand, or just have any questions?
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me on. I could chat with you for much longer, so I look forward to maybe future collaborations.
Please.
Yeah. So people can, I guess, like, the place that has all my stuff is my website, which is hey-west.com. I also have resources on my website. So I have those two book lists are on my resources page on my website, along with a whole bunch of other resources. You can, from my website, you can sign up for my newsletter, you can contact me directly, and you can also find a link to my Instagram, which is at hey_Wes_. And Instagram is the social media platform where I'm the most active.
Thank you so much, Wes. Y'all have no excuse. You can find him literally anywhere, literally anywhere. Please continue to learn and grow. Thank you again, Wes. I'm going to go ahead and close out this live. Everyone, thank you for coming to the Pediatric Speech Sister Show. I will see you this Saturday when we talk to Pamela Rowe, when we talk about clinical supervision. All right. Thank you again, Wes. We'll see you soon.
Bye.